Frank Morrison sat alone at the dining table he had built 43 years ago. The clock on the wall read 6:15 in the evening, his 74th birthday. The table was set for 4 people like it had been for decades. 4 plates, 4 forks, 4 cloth napkins Grace had embroidered with their initials, but only one chair was occupied. On the center of the table sat a single cupcake from the Safeway bakery, chocolate with white frosting. No candles. Frank had forgotten to buy candles, or maybe he had not forgotten. Maybe he just could not see the point anymore. His phone lay face up next to his plate. The screen was dark. No missed calls, no text messages, no notifications. The silence of the device was louder than any sound in the empty house. Frank picked up his fork, put it down, picked it up again. He looked at the empty chairs, Clay's chair, Diane's chair, Grace's chair. The ghosts of a family that used to exist sat there in the shadows of the dining room. He could almost see them. Clay at 20, laughing about something stupid from college. Diane at 16, rolling her eyes at her father's jokes. Grace reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. But they were not there. They had not been there for a long time. Frank stood up slowly. His left knee protested. The old shrapnel wound from Key San in 1968 never really healed. 55 years later and his body still remembered Vietnam. He walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, closed it. He was not hungry. He looked at the cupcake sitting alone on the dining table, a sad little thing, a monument to being forgotten. Frank Morrison had not always been alone. He met Grace Chen in the fall of 1973 at Montana State University. She was studying elementary education. He was working on his teaching degree in mathematics. Frank had just returned from Vietnam 6 months earlier, 24 years old with a limp and nightmares that woke him up screaming 3 nights a week. Grace never asked about the war, not at first. She just held his hand when they sat together in the library. When he woke up gasping in his dorm room at 3 in the morning, she was the one he called. She would talk to him about nothing, about everything. Her voice was the only thing that could pull him back from the jungle. They married in June of 1975 in a small ceremony at the courthouse in Bozeman. Frank wore his only suit. Grace wore a yellow dress she had sewn herself. They spent their honeymoon in a borrowed cabin near Yellowstone. They had $67 between them. Their first home was a mobile home on the edge of town, 10 feet wide and 50 feet long. The heater barely worked. The windows leaked when it rained. But it was theirs. Grace planted flowers in coffee cans outside the front door. Frank built a small deck from scrap lumber. They lived there for 6 years while they saved every dollar they could. Frank taught math at the high school. Grace taught 2nd grade. In the evenings, Frank worked construction jobs, framing houses, pouring concrete, anything that paid cash. Grace sold Avon products door to door on weekends. They ate rice and beans 4 nights a week. They wore clothes from the Goodwill. They never went to restaurants, never took vacations. Every penny went into the coffee can buried in the back of the closet. They had 3 children. Clayton arrived in 1976, Diane in 1980, Owen in 1985. Each one came with new dreams, new sacrifices, new reasons to work harder. Frank took on more construction jobs. He taught summer school. He tutored students in the evenings. Grace worked every summer break. She babysat neighborhood kids. She cleaned houses. Nothing was too small. Nothing was beneath them. The goal was simple. Their children would have opportunities they never had. Clayton wanted to study engineering at the University of Colorado Boulder. The out-of-state tuition was crushing. Frank worked double shifts for 2 years. He ate lunch in his truck to save money. He wore boots with holes in the soles until they literally fell apart. Clayton got his degree. 4 years. $180,000. Frank paid every cent. Diane wanted to study accounting at Montana State, not as expensive as Boulder but still a fortune for a family living paycheck to paycheck. Grace took a second job at Target. She worked retail on weekends and evenings. She came home at midnight smelling like cheap perfume from the cosmetics section. Her feet bled from standing on concrete floors. Diane got her degree, $95,000. They paid every cent. Owen wanted to go to law school at the University of Texas. The tuition alone was enough to buy a house. Frank took out loans. He mortgaged the house they had finally bought. Grace worked overtime until she was so tired she could barely stand. Owen got his degree, $220,000. They paid every cent. By the time Owen graduated in 2010, Frank was 61 years old. Grace was 57. They had nothing saved for retirement. The house had a second mortgage. Frank's truck was 20 years old, but their children had degrees, good careers, nice homes. They had escaped the poverty that had defined Frank and Grace's entire lives. Frank and Grace thought they had won. They had built something real. 3 successful children. 3 good people who would never struggle like their parents had struggled. Who would never know the shame of counting pennies at the grocery store. Who would never know the exhaustion of working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. On their 40th wedding anniversary, Frank and Grace sat on the porch of their small house. They held hands. They watched the sunset. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. She said only 4 words. "We did good, Frank." He kissed the top of her head. He believed her. But things were already changing. The shifts were small at first, easy to miss, easy to explain away. Sunday dinners started having exceptions. Clay had a business meeting. Diane's kids had soccer tournaments. Owen was working on a big case. One Sunday became 2. 2 became a month. The family gatherings that had been sacred for 30 years slowly dissolved into memory. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became rarer. The excuses became familiar. Busy with work, busy with kids, busy with life. Frank and Grace understood. They had been busy once too. They had sacrificed so their children could be busy with important things. This was the natural order. Children grew up. Children moved on. Frank retired at 65. Grace kept teaching because she loved it. They made plans, small plans, reasonable plans. They would visit the national parks they had never seen. They would take the trip to Glacier they had always talked about. They would spend more time with the grandchildren. They made a list in an old notebook, places to see, things to do, all the deferred dreams of a life spent working. Glacier National Park, Yellowstone in summer, the Grand Canyon. They bought a used camera. They studied maps. They talked about leaving in the spring. But Grace started coughing in January of 2020, a dry, persistent cough that would not go away. By March, she could not walk upstairs without stopping to breathe. By April, she was losing weight. By May, they were sitting in an oncologist's office listening to words like stage 4 and metastatic and palliative care. Lung cancer, aggressive, already in her bones, already in her liver. The doctor gave her 18 months, maybe 2 years with treatment. Grace had never smoked a cigarette in her entire life. She was 67 years old. She had taught second graders to read for 40 years. She had raised 3 children. She had worked herself to exhaustion so those children could have better lives. And now cancer was eating her alive. The battle began. Chemotherapy every 2 weeks, radiation, clinical trials, experimental treatments. Insurance covered some of it, not all of it. Frank paid the rest. He did not care about the cost. He would have sold everything they owned. He would have lived in a cardboard box if it meant one more day with Grace. He became an expert in her care. He learned to read lab results. He memorized the names of medications. He knew which anti-nausea drug worked best. He knew exactly how to position her pillows so she could breathe easier. He slept in a chair next to her bed. He held her hand through the worst of it. The children came at first. Clay drove up from Denver the day they got the diagnosis. He sat in the hospital waiting room. His face was pale, his hands shook. Diane flew in from Billings. She cried with her mother. She promised to visit every weekend. Owen took 2 weeks off work. He stayed at the house. He helped Frank with the medical equipment. He researched treatment options. But 2 years is a long time to watch someone die. Clay's visits became monthly, then every other month. He had projects at work, big developments, important clients. He called instead, short conversations. How is she doing? Is there anything you need? I'll try to come next month. Diane came less and less. The hospital smell made her sick. Seeing her mother so frail was too hard. She sent cards. She texted Frank every few days. She promised she was thinking about them. She just could not handle being there. Owen lasted the longest. He came every few weeks through the first year. But his law firm was demanding. He had cases. He had billable hours. He had a wife and 2 small children who needed him. The visits spaced out, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months. He felt guilty. Frank could hear it in his voice on the phone, but guilt did not bring him back. Frank did not blame them. He told himself he did not blame them. Watching someone you love die slowly is torture. It was easier for them to stay away. Easier to remember Grace as she had been, healthy, strong, laughing. Not this thin, brittle woman who could barely lift a spoon. He told himself these things. He almost believed them. Grace died at 4:23 in the morning on March 15, 2022. 2 years and 1 month after diagnosis. She had beaten the odds by 3 months. Frank held her hand. A soft rain tapped against the hospital window. The machines beeped steadily. Then they did not beep anymore. Her last words were whispered, barely audible. Frank had to lean close to hear them. "Take care of yourself, Frank. Promise me." He promised. He would have promised her anything, even lies. The funeral was large. Grace had taught elementary school for 40 years. Former students came. Some were in their 50s now. They told stories about Mrs. Morrison, how she had helped them learn to read, how she had believed in them when no one else did, how she had changed their lives. The 3 children were there. Clay in a black suit that probably cost more than Frank's truck, Diane with her husband and teenage kids, Owen looking hollow and exhausted. They received condolences. They organized the service. They were attentive and present and everything children should be. For 3 days, they were a family again. Then the funeral ended. The last guest left. The flowers began to wilt. And one by one, the children returned to their lives. Clay had to get back to Denver, a project deadline. Diane needed to get home to her family. Owen had court on Monday. They hugged Frank. They told him to call if he needed anything. They promised to visit soon. Soon. That word became the defining lie of Frank's life. The house was too quiet after they left. The silence was physical. It pressed against his ears. It filled his lungs. Frank walked from room to room. Every corner held a memory. The kitchen where Grace had cooked 10,000 meals. The living room where they had watched the kids grow up. The bedroom where they had slept together for 47 years. He could not stay there, but he could not leave. Frank fell into a routine. He woke at 5:30 every morning, force of habit, 50 years of waking early for work. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. He stared at nothing. He tried to fill the days. He cleaned the house even though it was already clean. He organized closets that were already organized. He worked in the yard. He fixed things that were not broken. Anything to keep moving. Anything to avoid sitting still long enough to feel the crushing weight of being alone. He called his children. He tried not to call too often. Once a week seemed reasonable, not desperate, not needy, just a father checking in. Clay answered maybe one call out of 3. His voice was always rushed, always distracted, background noise of job sites, the murmur of other voices. "Dad, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back?" He never called back. Diane was more consistent. She answered. She asked how he was. She told him about her life, her kids, her job. The conversations lasted maybe 5 minutes, always ending with the same phrase. "I have to run, Dad. Talk soon." Owen was the worst because Owen had always been closest. He had been the sensitive one, the one who asked questions, the one who sat with Frank late at night working through math problems even though he was studying law, the one who understood silence. Now Owen's phone went straight to voicemail 7 times out of 10. When he did answer, the conversations were brief, awkward, like talking to a stranger who happened to share your last name. The months after Grace died blurred together. Summer became fall, fall became winter. Each season marked only by the weather outside, not by holidays, not by family gatherings. Those had ended. Frank's 74th birthday arrived exactly 1 year after Grace died. Same month, same day, March. He woke up that morning with a small, stupid hope. The kind of hope you know is foolish but you cannot quite kill. Maybe they would call, maybe they would visit, maybe they would remember, maybe this year would be different. He made coffee, he checked his phone, nothing. By 10 in the morning, he told himself he did not care. By noon, he was angry at himself for caring. By 3 in the afternoon, he was checking his phone every 5 minutes. At 9:47 that evening, Clay sent a text message. "Happy birthday, Dad, sorry crazy day." No call, no voice, just 12 words on a screen. Diane called at 7:30. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She sang happy birthday quickly, promised to visit soon, hung up claiming her daughter needed help with homework. Owen sent nothing. No text, no call, no acknowledgement that his father had been born 74 years ago and might appreciate hearing from his youngest son. Frank sat alone at the dining table. He looked at the single cupcake he had bought himself. He did not light a candle. He did not sing. He just sat there until midnight. Then he threw the cupcake in the trash and went to bed. Father's Day was worse. Frank put on the suit Grace had bought him 10 years ago. He waited on the front porch from 10 in the morning. The suit was too big now. He had lost weight since Grace died. Food did not taste like anything anymore, but he wore it anyway. He wanted to look presentable when they arrived. 11 o'clock came and went. Noon, 1 o'clock. He told himself they were running late, traffic was bad, something came up. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. He sat in the heat. Sweat soaked through his shirt. He did not go inside. At 6:15, Diane called. Her voice was bright, cheerful, like she had not just let her father sit alone all day on Father's Day. "Happy Father's Day, Dad. I'm so sorry we couldn't make it. The kids had this thing and Jeff had to work and it's just been crazy. But we're thinking about you. We'll visit real soon. Promise." Frank said it was fine. He said he understood. He hung up. He sat on the porch until dark. Then he went inside. He took off the suit. He hung it carefully in the closet. He made a sandwich he did not eat. He went to bed. Clay never called. Owen never called. Frank deleted the Father's Day reminder from his phone calendar. No point keeping it. The first anniversary of Grace's death approached. March 15, 2023. Frank drove to the cemetery at dawn. He brought white roses, Grace's favorite. He cleaned her headstone. He pulled weeds from around the grave. He sat on the ground next to her and talked. He told her about the house, about the yard, about the weather. He told her he was eating okay, sleeping okay. He lied about both. He told her he missed her. That part was true. He checked his phone. He had sent a text to all 3 children the night before, a simple message. "Tomorrow is the anniversary of Mom's death. I'll be at the cemetery at 8 if anyone wants to join me." Clay replied, "Sorry, Dad, went last week with the kids. Can't make it tomorrow, work thing." Diane replied, "Oh, Dad, I'll try, might be late, kids have school." Owen did not reply at all. Frank waited at the cemetery until noon. Nobody came. He drove home. He heated up canned soup. He sat in Grace's chair. He cried for the first time since the funeral. The loneliness was not poetic. It was not romantic. It was not the bittersweet solitude of an old man reflecting on a life well lived. It was brutal. It was physical. It was waking up every morning to silence. It was cooking meals for one. It was talking to yourself because there was no one else to talk to. It was calling your children and hearing the disappointment in their voices when they realized it was you. It was becoming an obligation, a chore, a box to check. Called Dad this week. Done. Frank started talking to Grace like she was still alive. He would sit in the living room and tell her about his day. He would ask her opinion on things. He would laugh at memories and wait for her to laugh with him. The house stayed silent, but in his mind he could hear her voice. "What do you think, Gracie? Should I plant tomatoes this year?" "Of course, Frank, you love tomatoes. I saw the Johnsons at the store today. They asked about you." "That's nice, dear." "I'm so tired, Grace. I'm so tired." "I know, love, I know." He knew it was not healthy. He knew it was a symptom of something breaking inside him. He did not care. The conversations with the ghost of his wife were the only conversations that felt real anymore. October arrived, 18 months since Grace died. The leaves turned. The air grew cold. Frank woke up one morning and realized he could not remember what day it was. Tuesday, Wednesday, it did not matter. Every day was the same. Wake up. Pretend to eat breakfast. Find tasks to fill the hours. Go to bed. Repeat. He was not living. He was existing. There was a difference. One night in late October, Frank sat in the dark living room. He did not turn on the lights. He just sat in Grace's chair. The streetlight outside cast shadows through the window. The house creaked and settled around him. He thought about his life. 74 years, 50 of them spent building a family, raising children, sacrificing everything, working himself to exhaustion. For what? For children who could not be bothered to call, for children who saw him as a burden, for children who were waiting for him to die so they could sell the house and split the money. He thought about the next 20 years if he was unlucky enough to live that long, alone in this house, alone at holidays, alone at birthdays, slowly becoming invisible, slowly being forgotten completely. He stood up. His knee protested. He walked to the bedroom. He opened the closet. On the top shelf, buried under old blankets, was a box he had not opened in 50 years. Inside was his service pistol from Vietnam, a Colt .45. He had carried it through the jungle. He had fired it twice, once at an enemy soldier who was trying to kill him, once at a snake that had gotten into their camp. After the war, he had brought it home. He had cleaned it. He had locked it away. He had never touched it again. Until tonight. The gun was heavier than he remembered, colder. He sat on the edge of the bed. He held the weapon in both hands. It would be easy, quick. No more loneliness. No more waiting for phone calls that never came. No more pretending that anything mattered. He loaded the magazine. 7 rounds. He only needed one. He chambered a round. The sound was loud in the quiet house, mechanical, final. He put the barrel under his chin. His finger rested on the trigger. The metal was cold against his skin. He closed his eyes. In his mind he saw Grace. Not Grace dying in a hospital bed. Grace young. Grace laughing. Grace on their wedding day in her yellow dress, Grace holding Clayton as a newborn, Grace teaching Diane to ride a bike, Grace hugging Owen after his high school graduation. He heard her voice, not the whisper of her final words, her real voice, strong and clear. "You promised to take care of yourself, Frank." His finger trembled on the trigger. "Promise me." He lowered the gun. He sat there for a long time, the gun heavy in his lap, his hands shaking. He was crying, deep sobs that came from somewhere dark and old inside him. He cried until there was nothing left. Then he unloaded the gun. He put it back in the box. He put the box back on the shelf. He closed the closet door. He was not going to kill himself, not because he wanted to live, but because he had promised Grace he would take care of himself, and he kept his promises, even when they hurt. But he could not stay in this house. This house was killing him slowly. Every room was a memory of what he had lost. Every silence was a reminder that he was alone. If he stayed here, he would end up back in that closet with that gun. Maybe next time he would not hear Grace's voice in time. He needed to leave. He needed to go somewhere where there were no memories. Somewhere where the silence was just silence and not the absence of a family that used to exist. Frank went to the kitchen. He opened the drawer where they kept important papers, birth certificates, marriage license, the deed to the house, and buried underneath a manila envelope he had forgotten about. Inside was paperwork from a decade ago, his brother Earl's estate. Earl Morrison had been 10 years older than Frank, a quiet man who had never married, who had lived alone on a ranch in eastern Montana, who had died of a heart attack at 74 while feeding cattle on a January morning. Earl had left everything to Frank, 300 acres of land, a house, barns, equipment. Frank had signed the papers. He had inherited it all, but he had never visited. He had been too busy, too focused on his own life, on Grace, on work, on raising children who no longer wanted anything to do with him. The ranch was 8 hours north, near a town called Riverside, population 1,200, middle of nowhere, no hospital nearby, no stores, no restaurants, nothing. It was perfect. Frank looked at the paperwork. The deed was in his name, had been for 10 years. He owned 300 acres of land he had never seen, a house he had never entered, a life he had never lived. He could go there, he could leave this place, he could start over. The thought was absurd. He was 74 years old. His knee barely worked. He had never ranched in his life. He knew nothing about cattle or land management or living in isolation. He would probably die out there within a month. But maybe that was okay. Maybe dying alone in Montana was better than dying alone in this house surrounded by ghosts. He made the decision at 3 in the morning. He did not sleep. He spent the rest of the night planning. He would leave in the morning. He would not tell anyone until he was already gone. He would not give them a chance to talk him out of it. He would not listen to their concerns, their objections, their half-hearted offers to help that would never materialize. He would just go. At 5:30, Frank started packing. He did not take much. Clothes, some books, photos of Grace, the important documents, his tools. He left the furniture. He left the dishes. He left everything that was too heavy with memory. He loaded his old Ford F-250 pickup. The truck was 20 years old, rust on the wheel wells, 200,000 miles, but it ran. That was all that mattered. By 8 in the morning, he was ready. He walked through the house one last time. He stood in the bedroom where Grace had died. He stood in the kitchen where they had shared 10,000 meals. He stood in the living room where they had raised their children. Then he locked the door. He got in his truck. He started the engine. He pulled out his phone. He sent a group text to all 3 children. I'm moving to Montana, Uncle Earl's old ranch, leaving today, just wanted you to know. He put the phone on the passenger seat. He backed out of the driveway. He did not look at the house in the rearview mirror. The drive north was long, empty highways, small towns, gas stations. Frank drove in silence. No radio, no music, just the sound of the truck engine and the wind. His phone buzzed constantly for the first 2 hours. He did not look at it. He knew what the messages would say. Confusion, concern, arguments, reasons why this was a terrible idea, offers to help that were really demands to stay. At a rest stop 3 hours in, he finally checked the phone. 17 messages, 12 missed calls. Clay's messages were predictable. Dad, what are you talking about? This is insane. Call me right now. You can't just move to Montana. You're 74 years old. Diane's messages were panicked. Dad, please tell me this is a joke. You can't go out there alone. What if something happens? What if you get hurt? We're worried about you. Frank almost laughed at that. Worried about him. They had not been worried for 18 months. They had not been worried when he sat alone on his birthday. They had not been worried when he spent Father's Day waiting on the porch. They had not been worried when he spent the anniversary of their mother's death alone at a cemetery. But now they were worried. Now that he was doing something they did not approve of. Now that he was leaving. Owen had sent only one message. It had come through 10 minutes ago. The first contact Frank had received from his youngest son in 6 months. Dad, please reconsider. That place is falling apart. You'll die out there alone. Frank stared at those words. You'll die out there alone. As if he was not already dying alone. As if the last 18 months had been anything other than a slow death in a house full of ghosts. He typed a response, then deleted it, typed another, deleted it. Finally, he just turned off the phone. He put it in the glove box. He got back in the truck. He drove. The landscape changed as he drove north. The towns got smaller. The spaces between them got larger. Mountains appeared on the horizon. The sky got bigger. By the time he crossed into Montana, he felt like he was driving into a different world. He reached Riverside at 3 in the afternoon. The town was tiny. One main street, a hardware store, a diner, a church, a gas station, a post office. That was it. Frank drove through in under a minute. The ranch was 6 miles outside town. The turnoff was easy to miss. A faded mailbox with Morrison painted on the side in letters almost completely worn away. A dirt road disappearing into tall grass. Frank turned. The truck bounced over ruts and rocks. The grass on either side was chest high, untouched for a decade. The road climbed a small hill. At the top, Frank stopped the truck. Below him spread 300 acres of land, rolling grassland, a creek cutting through the valley. In the distance, a line of cottonwood trees, and in the middle of it all, the house. It was worse than Frank had imagined. The roof sagged on one side. Windows were broken or missing entirely. The porch had partially collapsed. Paint that might have once been white was now gray and peeling. The whole structure looked like it might fall down in the next strong wind. The barn was in even worse shape. Half of it had collapsed. What remained was just a skeleton of beams and posts. Fences lay flat on the ground. Corrals were overgrown with weeds. It was a disaster, a ruin, a place that should probably just be bulldozed and started over. Frank looked at it for a long time. Then he put the truck in gear. He drove down the hill. He parked in front of the house. He turned off the engine. The silence was immediate and total. No traffic, no neighbors, no sounds of civilization, just wind moving through grass, birds calling, the distant sound of water in the creek. Frank got out of the truck. He walked up to the front door. The steps creaked under his weight. The door was unlocked. It swung open with a groan. Inside was dark and dusty, furniture covered in sheets, mouse droppings everywhere, cobwebs in every corner. It smelled like decay and abandonment. Frank stood in the doorway, 74 years old, alone, 8 hours from anything familiar, standing in a house that was falling apart, on land he had never seen before, with no plan, no support, no safety net. He should have been terrified. He should have gotten back in the truck and driven home. Instead, he felt something he had not felt in 18 months, something small and fragile but unmistakably real. He felt peace. This place had no memories of Grace, no ghosts of children who had abandoned him, no phone that refused to ring, no neighbors who looked at him with pity. This place was nothing, empty, forgotten. Just like him. Frank walked into the house. He found a broom in a closet. He started sweeping. The light was fading. He had no electricity, no running water, no heat. He had a sleeping bag in the truck, some canned food, a flashlight. That would be enough for tonight. He would figure out the rest tomorrow. For the first time since Grace died, Frank Morrison went to sleep without crying. He lay on the floor in his sleeping bag. He listened to the wind. He listened to the silence. And he slept. Frank woke to sunlight streaming through broken windows. For a moment he did not know where he was. The ceiling above him was wrong. The sounds were wrong. Then memory returned. Montana. The ranch. 300 acres of land he had inherited and forgotten. He sat up in his sleeping bag. His back ached from sleeping on the floor. His knee throbbed. 74 years of wear and tear announcing themselves. He could hear birds outside, the wind moving through grass. No traffic, no neighbors, no sounds of human civilization at all. It was 6 in the morning. Frank had been waking at this hour for 50 years. The habit was carved into his bones. He stood slowly, stretched. His joints protested. He ignored them. The house looked worse in daylight. Mouse droppings covered every surface. The kitchen sink was brown with rust. Cabinets hung crooked on broken hinges. The floor was warped and stained. Wallpaper peeled in long strips. This was not a house. This was a corpse of a house. Something that had died years ago and was slowly returning to the earth. Frank walked outside. The morning air was cold, clear. The sky was enormous, bigger than any sky he had ever seen. It stretched horizon to horizon without interruption. No buildings, no power lines, no planes, just blue infinity. He looked at the barn. Half of it had collapsed inward. The remaining half leaned at an angle that defied physics. Fence posts lay scattered across the property like broken teeth. The corrals were invisible under years of weed growth. Frank had no plan, no experience, no idea what he was doing, but he had time, he had land, and he had nothing waiting for him back in Wyoming except an empty house full of ghosts. He walked to his truck. He had loaded basic supplies before leaving, a toolbox, some canned food, a case of bottled water, a camping stove. It was not much, but it was enough to start. He ate breakfast standing in the driveway, cold beans straight from the can. They tasted like metal. He did not care. Food was fuel, nothing more. After eating, Frank decided to explore the property. He needed to understand what he was dealing with. He walked past the house, past the collapsed barn. He followed an old cattle trail that led toward the back of the property. The land rolled in gentle waves. Grass grew chest-high in places, untouched, wild. Frank walked for 20 minutes. His knee complained. His breathing got heavy. He was not in the shape he used to be, but he kept walking. The trail led to a small valley. A creek ran through the bottom. Cottonwood trees lined the banks. The water was clear and fast. Frank could hear it from 50 yards away. He followed the sound. That is when he saw them. Cattle, maybe 25 or 30 head, black Angus mixed with something else. They were scattered across the valley, grazing, drinking from the creek, wild but healthy. Frank stood very still. He watched the animals. They had been here for years, descendants of whatever herd Earl had owned. Left to fend for themselves after he died, they had survived, adapted, became something between domestic and wild. One bull lifted his head, looked at Frank. The distance between them was maybe 100 yards. They stared at each other. The bull snorted, pawed the ground, then went back to grazing. Frank smiled. It was the first real smile he had felt in months. These animals were like him, abandoned, forgotten, but still alive, still surviving. He spent an hour watching the herd, counting them, trying to gauge their condition. They looked good, strong. The valley provided everything they needed: water, grass, shelter in the trees. Frank walked back to the house. He had work to do. The cattle were not going anywhere, but the house was barely habitable. He needed to fix that first. He started with the generator. It was in a shed behind the house, an old diesel unit, probably 20 years old. Frank pulled the cover off. The engine was seized. Mice had nested in the air filter. Wires were chewed through. He spent the rest of the day working on it. He had no manual, no instructions, just decades of experience fixing broken things. He cleaned the carburetor, replaced the fuel filter with one from his truck, spliced wires back together. By late afternoon, he was ready to try. The generator coughed, sputtered, died. He tried again, same result. Third time, fourth time. On the fifth attempt, the engine caught. Black smoke poured out. The whole thing shook like it might explode. Then it settled into a rough idle. Power, 40 years as a teacher and construction worker. Frank knew how to make broken things work. He went inside, flipped a light switch. Nothing happened. He tried another switch. Another. The wiring in the house was probably destroyed. That was a problem for another day. The generator could run lights and power tools, but it could not run all day. Diesel was expensive. He needed another solution. That night Frank drove to Riverside. The town looked even smaller after dark. Most businesses were closed, but the hardware store was still open. A hand-painted sign read Jake's Hardware. Frank walked in. The store smelled like sawdust and motor oil. Shelves packed with tools and supplies. An older man stood behind the counter, maybe late 60s, weathered face, flannel shirt. He looked up when Frank entered. "Can I help you?" Frank nodded. "I need information about solar panels and parts to fix a well pump." The man studied him, new around here. "Just moved to the old Morrison place. I'm Frank. Earl was my brother." The man's expression changed. Recognition, maybe surprise. "I'm Jake Reeves. I knew Earl. Good man, kept to himself." Frank saw the tattoo on Jake's forearm. Marine Corps, eagle, globe, and anchor, faded with age but unmistakable. "You serve?" Jake nodded. "Army, Vietnam, 69. Frank held out his hand. "Marines, 68, Khe Sanh." Jake's handshake was firm. Rough calluses, working hands. "Welcome home, brother." Those two words carried weight, more meaning than hours of conversation. Frank just nodded. They spent the next hour talking, not about the war, about solar panels and well pumps and the realities of living off-grid in Montana. Jake drew diagrams, made lists, recommended suppliers. Before Frank left, Jake said something that stayed with him. "People around here take care of each other. You need help, you ask." Frank drove back to the ranch with a truck bed full of supplies and something he had not felt in a long time: hope. The work began in earnest. Frank established a routine: Wake at dawn, work until his body gave out, sleep, repeat. The first week he focused on water. The well pump was ancient, mechanical, no electronics to break, but the leather seals had rotted away. Frank ordered new parts from a supplier 3 towns over. While waiting, he hauled water from the creek in 5-gallon buckets. His back screamed. His shoulders burned. He made 20 trips a day, up the hill from the creek, down again, up again. By the end of the week, his hands were covered in blisters. He wrapped them in duct tape and kept working. When the parts arrived, he rebuilt the pump. It took 2 days, lying on his back in the dirt, reaching up into the well housing. Bolts rusted solid, knuckles bleeding. But on the 3rd day, he primed the pump, worked the handle. Brown water coughed out, then clear. Frank cupped his hands, drank. The water was cold and clean and tasted like victory. Week 2, the roof. Frank bought sheets of corrugated metal from Jake, hauled them up a ladder that was probably older than he was. The roof pitch was steep. His bad knee made climbing difficult. He worked slowly, methodically, secured each panel with screws, overlapped them properly to shed water. He fell once, sliding down the roof, caught himself on the ladder at the last second. His heart hammered, his hands shook. He climbed back up and kept working. By the end of the week, the house had a complete roof. It would not win any beauty contests, but it would keep the rain out. That was enough. Week 3, windows. Frank measured each opening, drove to a salvage yard in Billings, 2 hours each way. He bought used windows, mismatched sizes, mismatched styles. He did not care. He installed them one by one, caulked the gaps, made them weathertight. The house began to look less like a ruin, more like a place someone might actually live. Week 4, the solar panels. Frank had never installed solar before. He watched YouTube videos in the parking lot of the library in Riverside, took notes, studied wiring diagrams. Then he climbed back on that roof and went to work. He mounted the panels on the south-facing slope, ran wiring through the attic, installed the charge controller and battery bank in the basement, connected everything according to the diagrams. When he flipped the switch, lights came on, real lights, not the flickering glow of the generator, clean, steady power from the sun. Frank stood in the living room, lights on, water running, roof solid overhead. He had done this, alone, with a bad knee and hands that shook when he was tired. He sat down on the floor, put his head in his hands, and cried, not from sadness, from something else, something he could not name. Week 5 through 8, the barn and fences. This was harder, heavier work. Frank could not do it alone. He drove to town, found Jake at the hardware store. "I need help, I can pay." Jake made a call. The next day a truck pulled up to the ranch. 2 men got out, Hispanic, father and son. The father maybe 50, the son in his 20s. "Miguel Santos, my boy Carlos. Jake said you need work done." Frank shook their hands. "I need the barn rebuilt, the fences fixed, whatever you think is fair." Miguel walked the property, studied the barn, checked the fence lines. He came back with a number, fair. Frank agreed immediately. They worked together for 3 weeks. Miguel and Carlos did the heavy lifting. Frank helped where he could, held boards, ran errands, made coffee, learned. Miguel did not talk much, but he worked with the precision of a craftsman, every cut exact, every nail driven true. Carlos was young and strong. He could lift things Frank could not, but he watched his father, learned from him, the way sons should. They rebuilt the barn. New posts, new beams, metal siding. It was not fancy, but it was solid, built to last another 50 years. The fences took longer. Miles of barbed wire, posts every 10 feet, stretching the wire tight, corner braces, gates, backbreaking work. By mid-November it was done. Frank paid Miguel in cash, more than they had agreed on. Miguel tried to refuse. Frank insisted. "You did good work. I appreciate it." Miguel nodded. "You need anything else, you call." Winter arrived hard and fast. The temperature dropped below freezing and stayed there. Snow came in late November. Not the light, fluffy snow of movies. Heavy, wet snow that piled 3 feet deep in a single night. Frank woke to whiteness. The world transformed. The ranch disappeared under a blanket of white. Only the roof of the house and the peak of the barn were visible. He put on every layer of clothing he owned, stepped outside. The cold hit like a fist, 20 below zero. The wind made it worse, 30 below, 40 below, cold that hurt to breathe. The cattle. Frank grabbed a shovel, started breaking trail toward the valley. The snow was hip deep. Every step was work. His lungs burned. His face went numb. It took him 2 hours to reach the herd. They were huddled in the trees by the creek. Snow piled on their backs, but they were alive, tough animals, built for this. Frank had loaded hay bales on a sled. He dragged it behind him, broke the bales open, scattered hay for the cattle. They moved slowly, conservatively, eating what they needed, no more. He made that trip every day for a week, through snow, through wind, through cold that made his bad knee seize up completely, but the cattle needed him, so he went. The blizzard broke on day 8, the sky cleared. The temperature rose to 10 degrees, practically tropical. Frank stood on his porch, looked at the white world. He had survived. The cattle had survived. The house was warm. He had food. He had water. He was okay. Thanksgiving arrived. Frank had forgotten it was coming. One day looked like the next out here, but Betty Walsh from the diner called him. He had given her his number weeks ago, just in case. "Frank, you doing anything for Thanksgiving?" "Working, feeding cattle, same as always." "No, you're not. You're coming to my place. I'm hosting what we call the Forgotten Club. People whose kids don't come around anymore. You'll fit right in." Frank wanted to refuse, but something in her voice stopped him. Not pity, understanding. "What time?" 3 o'clock. Bring yourself, that's all." Betty's house was small, warm, crowded with 8 people, all of them over 60, all of them alone on a holiday that was supposed to be about family. Betty introduced everyone: Harold, Dorothy, Robert, and Susan, others whose names Frank forgot immediately, but they welcomed him, made space, poured him coffee. The turkey was dry, everyone joked about it. The mashed potatoes were lumpy, the gravy was too salty. Nobody cared, they ate, they talked, they laughed. Frank learned their stories. Harold's son had stolen his retirement savings and disappeared. Dorothy's daughters were fighting over her house while she was still alive. Robert and Susan's children had borrowed money for years, never paid it back, then stopped calling. These were his people, the forgotten, the discarded, the parents who had given everything and received nothing in return. Frank did not cry, but his chest was tight, his throat hurt. These people understood, they knew. At the end of the night, Betty hugged him. "Come back for Christmas." He did. Christmas was harder, memories of grace, of children opening presents, of laughter and chaos and the warmth of family, but the Forgotten Club was there. They exchanged small gifts, drank too much eggnog, sang carols off-key. Frank received one package from his children, from Clay, an Amazon gift card, $100, generic, impersonal, the physical embodiment of not caring enough to put in effort. Diane sent a card, a printed card with a generic message and her name signed at the bottom. No personal note, no photo of the grandchildren, just a card that could have been sent to anyone. Owen sent nothing. Frank took the gift card and the card to his fireplace. He fed them into the flames, watched them curl and blacken and turn to ash. He felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just a distant acknowledgement that this chapter of his life was closed. He had a new family now, one that chose to be with him. That was enough. Spring came slowly. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass underneath, brown and matted, but underneath that green shoots, life returning. March 15th arrived. 1 year since Grace died. Frank drove to the cemetery in Riverside. There was a small plot there, community memorial for people to visit. He had no stone for Grace. She was buried 8 hours away in Wyoming, but he needed a place to talk to her. He brought flowers from the store, cheap daisies in plastic wrap. He sat on a bench, spoke to the air, to Grace, to memory. Gracie, it's been a year. I know you'd worry, but I'm okay. Really okay. I've got land, got cattle, got friends. I'm not waiting for the phone anymore. I'm not sitting in that empty house. I'm living, the way you wanted me to. He stayed for an hour, then drove home. The word felt right. Home, not the house in Wyoming, this place, this land, this life. April brought calving season. Frank had never delivered a calf, but nature did not care about his experience. The first cow went into labor at 2 in the morning. Frank heard her bellowing, grabbed a flashlight, ran to the valley. She was down, straining. Something was wrong. The calf was breech, backward. Frank could see the hooves, but nothing was moving. He had no choice. He washed his hands in the creek, rolled up his sleeves, reached inside the cow. The warmth was shocking, the strength of the contractions. He found the calf's legs, repositioned them, pulled when the cow pushed. It took 20 minutes. His arms were covered in blood and fluid. His back screamed, but the calf came, a bull calf, small, wet, not breathing. Frank cleared the nose and mouth, rubbed the ribs hard. The calf gasped, coughed, breathed. The cow got to her feet, turned around, started licking her baby, cleaning it. The calf wobbled, tried to stand, fell, tried again. After 10 minutes it was standing. After 20 it was nursing. Frank sat in the grass, exhausted, covered in birth, watching new life. He delivered 8 calves that season. Not all survived, but most did. He learned with each one, got better, more confident. By May the ranch felt alive. Cattle spread across the valley, calves running and playing, grass growing tall, the creek running fast with snowmelt. Frank had found something he did not expect: purpose. The town noticed. Frank volunteered at the high school, teaching basic carpentry to kids who barely knew which end of a hammer to hold. He helped Jake with inventory at the hardware store. He fixed fences for elderly neighbors who could not do it themselves. He did not ask for payment, did not expect recognition, just did the work the way he had always done. People responded. Jake never charged him full price anymore. Betty's coffee was always free. Pastor Jim invited him to church. Frank still did not go, but the invitation mattered. Respect had to be earned. Frank was earning it, one fence post at a time. One afternoon in late May, Frank was working in the back pasture, building a new corral. The cattle had multiplied. He needed more space to manage them. He was digging post holes, hard work. The ground was rocky. Each hole took 20 minutes of fighting with a post hole digger. His shoulders burned. His hands were blistered again. The digger hit something solid, not a rock. The sound was different, metallic. Frank cleared away the dirt, found a corner of something buried. Metal square. He dug around it, pulled. It was heavy, stuck. He got a shovel, dug deeper, wider. After 20 minutes he could see what it was: a metal box, the size of a large toolbox, rusted but intact, buried maybe 3 feet down. Frank pulled it free, set it on the ground. His heart was racing, not from exertion, from something else. The box had a lock, rusted solid. Frank hit it with a hammer. It broke on the second strike. He opened the lid. Inside was a thick plastic bag, sealed, waterproof, protecting whatever was inside. Frank tore it open. Documents, lots of them, papers in protective sleeves. Frank pulled them out with shaking hands, started reading. The first document was a land deed. Additional property, 800 acres adjoining the ranch, purchased by Earl Morrison 20 years ago, when land was cheap and nobody wanted it. The second document was a mineral rights lease. Northern Plains Energy Corporation, signed 15 years ago. Frank read the terms. $8 million upfront payment, $600,000 annual royalties for oil and gas extraction rights, term of 30 years. Frank stopped breathing. Read it again. The numbers did not change. 8 million plus 600,000 per year for 15 years, that was. He could not do the math. His brain had stopped working. There were more documents, bank statements. First Security Bank in Riverside, account number. The last statement was dated 10 years ago, right before Earl died. The balance was $14.2 million. Frank sat on the ground, the documents spread around him. The sun was setting. Orange light stretched across the grassland. Everything looked the same. The cattle, the creek, the mountains in the distance. But everything had changed. At the bottom of the box was a letter, hand-written on lined paper. The ink had faded but was still readable. Frank recognized Earl's handwriting. Frank, if you are reading this, I am gone. Did not trust lawyers or government. Buried this myself. The land is yours. The money is yours. I lived simple because I am a simple man. You are smarter. Use it right. Do not let greedy bastards take it. They will try. Stand your ground, Earl. Frank read the letter 3 times. Then he started laughing. A low sound that grew, louder, deeper, echoing across the empty land. He had come here with nothing. A broken old man running from ghosts, living in a falling-down house, eating beans from a can, working until his hands bled, happy just to have something to do, somewhere to be. And all this time, buried 3 feet under the ground he walked on, was a fortune. $20+ million. Frank looked at the sunset, at his cattle, at the ranch he had rebuilt with his own hands. He thought about the last 7 months, the hardest months of his life, the loneliest, the most painful, and the most meaningful. He had been happy here before he knew about the money. He had found peace, purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning. The money changed nothing about that, but it changed everything about what came next. Frank gathered the documents, put them carefully back in the bag, back in the box. He carried the box to the house, locked it in a closet. Then he went to feed his cattle, same as always, same as yesterday, same as tomorrow. But different, everything was different now. Frank did not sleep that night. He lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. The metal box was locked in the closet 10 feet away. Inside it were documents that said he was worth over $20 million. The number was too large to comprehend, too large to feel real. He kept thinking about the last 6 months. The work, the struggle, the satisfaction of fixing things with his own hands. He had been happy, genuinely happy for the first time since Grace died, and he had not needed money for that, just purpose, just a reason to wake up. But the money existed, and it changed things whether he wanted it to or not. At dawn, Frank got up, fed the cattle, came back to the house, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread in front of him. He needed to verify this was real, not some elaborate mistake, not Earl's fantasy, real. He found the bank information, First Security Bank, Riverside, Account number 7894521. He could drive there today, walk in, ask, but something held him back. Once he verified the money existed, everything would change. He could never go back to being just Frank Morrison, rancher, teacher, forgotten father living alone in Montana. He would become Frank Morrison, millionaire, target. But he needed to know. He put the documents in a folder, locked the metal box back in the closet, drove to town. First Security Bank was a small brick building on Main Street. Frank had driven past it 100 times, never gone inside. He parked his truck, sat there for 5 minutes, then walked in. The interior was wood paneling and outdated carpet, 3 teller windows, a desk for the manager. A woman in her 50s sat at the desk, professional, efficient-looking. Her nameplate said Linda Hartman. Frank approached. His heart was pounding. "Excuse me, I need some information about an account." Linda looked up, smiled. "Of course. Do you have an account number?" Frank pulled out the document, showed her. She typed into her computer. Her expression changed, surprise, then something else. She looked at Frank, looked at the screen, back at Frank. "Mr. Morrison, could you show me some identification, please?" Frank handed her his driver's license. She studied it, checked it against something on her screen. Then she stood. "Mr. Morrison, would you mind stepping into my office? This is going to take a few minutes." Frank followed her into a small private office. She closed the door, gestured to a chair. He sat. She sat across from him. Her professional smile was gone. Now she just looked serious. "Mr. Morrison, this account has been dormant for 10 years, waiting for Earl Morrison's heir. We have documentation that names you as sole beneficiary. We have been trying to contact you for years. The address we had was in Wyoming. I just moved here 6 months ago." Linda nodded. "I need to verify your identity. Then I can give you full account details. This will take maybe 20 minutes. Can you wait?" Frank nodded. Linda left. He sat alone in the office, looking at framed certificates on the wall, not really seeing them, just waiting. She came back with a file folder, thick. She sat down, opened it. "Mr. Morrison, everything checks out. You are the legal heir to Earl Morrison's estate. The account has been active this entire time. Northern Plains Energy has been depositing royalty payments twice annually, with the original deposit plus accrued interest over 10 years. The current balance is—" She paused, like she needed to prepare him. $21.7 million. Frank felt the room tilt. 21.7. He had thought it would be less. Fees, taxes, something. But it had grown. The money had been making money while he slept in a sleeping bag on a broken floor. "Mr. Morrison, are you all right? I came here in a $3,000 truck. I was worried about making it through winter. And you are telling me I have $21 million. Linda smiled. A real smile this time. "Yes, sir, I am telling you exactly that." Frank sat there. He tried to feel something. Joy, relief, excitement, but he just felt numb. "There is more," Linda continued. "Northern Plains Energy has been trying to contact you. They want to renegotiate the lease terms, expand their drilling operations. They have been depositing expansion payments into an escrow account. That is an additional $3 million waiting for your approval." $24 million. Frank could not breathe. "What do I need to do?" "You need to sign documents to take control of the account, update your contact information, and decide what you want to do about Northern Plains. But Mr. Morrison, you should probably get a lawyer. This is complicated. Estate law, oil and gas law, tax implications. Can you recommend someone?" Linda wrote on a notepad. "Ben Whitmore, Billings, he is very good. Tell him I sent you." Frank took the paper, signed the documents Linda needed, set up online access to the account. The whole process took an hour. When he walked out of the bank, he was legally in control of $21.7 million. He sat in his truck. He looked at his hands, covered in calluses, scarred from barbed wire and rough lumber, the hands of a man who had worked hard his entire life. Now those hands belonged to a millionaire. It did not feel real. Frank drove to Billings, 2 hours away. He found Ben Whitmore's office in a professional building downtown, made an appointment for the next day, drove back to the ranch, fed his cattle, fixed a loose board on the barn, made dinner, beans and rice, same as always. That night he called Ben's office, left a message. He needed legal advice, estate planning, oil and gas leases, everything. He would be there tomorrow at 2. The meeting with Ben took 3 hours. Ben was maybe 60, sharp eyes, careful questions. He reviewed all of Earl's documents, the land deeds, the mineral rights, the oil lease, the bank statements, everything. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Morrison, everything here is legitimate. Your brother was eccentric but very smart. He structured this to avoid probate, to minimize taxes, to protect the assets. This is all yours, free and clear. What about Northern Plains? Should I renegotiate?" Ben pulled out a calculator, did some math. If you renegotiate on favorable terms, expanded drilling, higher royalty percentage, you could be looking at annual income of $400,000 to $500,000 for the next 15 years, until the lease expires. Frank just stared at him. "My advice," Ben continued, "keep this very quiet. Do not tell anyone, not friends, not family. Money changes people. It changes how they see you. Once people know you are wealthy, everything becomes complicated." Frank nodded. He understood. "One more thing," Ben said. "I strongly recommend you set up a trust, move the assets into it, better legal protection, better tax treatment, and if anyone ever tries to sue you, the assets are protected." "Do it," Frank said, "whatever you think is best." They spent another hour on paperwork. Frank signed documents, gave Ben power of attorney for specific financial matters, set up the trust. When he left the office, he was no longer just Frank Morrison. He was Frank Morrison, sole beneficiary of the Morrison Family Trust, worth $24.7 million. He drove back to the ranch. Everything looked the same. The house, the barn, the cattle in the valley, but he saw it differently now. He could fix everything. He could hire people. He could make this place perfect. But something stopped him. If he suddenly started throwing money around, people would ask questions, word would spread, and Ben was right, everything would get complicated. So Frank decided he would upgrade, but slowly, carefully, nothing flashy, just practical improvements. Things that made sense for a retired teacher living on a modest pension and some cattle income. He started small. New appliances for the kitchen, used but functional, a better truck, not new, a 2018 Ford F-150 with 100,000 miles, reliable but not showy. He paid cash, told the dealer it was insurance money from an old accident. He hired Miguel and Carlos again, this time for bigger projects, a proper solar system with battery backup, a new well pump with an electric motor, insulation for the house, new wiring, a real bathroom with a shower that had hot water. Miguel never asked where the money came from, just did the work. Frank paid fair wages, nothing excessive, just what the work was worth. By late summer the ranch looked different, not rich, just well maintained, like someone was taking care of it. The locals noticed. Jake commented one day at the hardware store, "Place is looking good, Frank. You have been putting in work. Just fixing what needs fixing. Betty said something similar at the diner. You seem happy, settled. I am. And it was true. The money had not changed how he felt. He was still happy, still at peace. The money was just there, in the background, a safety net he hoped he would never need. But secrets do not stay secret forever, especially in small towns. The leak started with Carlos. He mentioned to his wife that Frank had paid $80,000 in cash for the solar system and barn renovation. His wife mentioned it to her sister in Billings. The sister worked at an office supply store. One of her customers worked for Northern Plains Energy. The customer mentioned hearing about Morrison Ranch. Someone had finally claimed Earl's estate. The company had been trying to find the heir for years. From there it spread. Small mentions, casual conversations. The heir to Morrison Ranch was back. He had money, oil money. A reporter from the Riverside Gazette called Frank one afternoon. He did not answer. She left a message. She was doing a story on local families. Could she interview him about inheriting his brother's ranch? Frank deleted the message. But the story came out anyway. Small article on page 3. Local rancher inherits family fortune. It was vague. Mentioned Earl's estate. Mentioned oil rights. Mentioned Frank was living at the ranch now. Nothing specific, nothing accurate, but enough. Within a week everyone in Riverside knew. The reactions varied. Jake was happy for him. Damn good luck, brother. Could not have happened to a better guy. Betty hugged him at the diner. You deserve good things, Frank. Pastor Jim said God provides for the faithful. But others reacted differently. Carol Henderson, the town gossip, told anyone who would listen that it seemed suspicious. Where did all this money really come from? Old men do not just inherit millions. A real estate developer named Rick Palmer showed up at the ranch uninvited. Slick suit, expensive car, big smile. Mr. Morrison, Rick Palmer, I help landowners monetize their assets. I understand you have significant acreage. I have buyers interested in development, residential, commercial. We could structure a deal that would be very profitable for you. Frank stood on his porch, did not invite Palmer inside. I am not selling. Mr. Morrison, let me at least show you the numbers. I am not interested. Palmer's smile thinned. You are leaving money on the table. That is my choice. Palmer left, but Frank knew he would not be the last. Vultures circled money, always. The calls from his children started 2 weeks after the article. Frank had not heard from them in 8 months. Radio silence. Then suddenly his phone was ringing constantly. Clay called first. His voice was bright, fake cheerful. Dad, how are you? It has been too long. Frank was feeding cattle when the phone rang. He almost did not answer, but habit made him pick up. Hello, Clay. Dad, I saw something online about Uncle Earl's estate. Is it true? Did you inherit property? Frank could hear the calculation in his son's voice, the angle being worked. I inherited the ranch, yes. That is incredible. Why did you not tell us? We could have helped you with the legal stuff. I work with property developers all the time. I could have given you advice. I hired a lawyer. It is handled. A pause, then Clay's voice changed. Less cheerful, more direct. Dad, how much are we talking about? The article mentioned oil rights. Frank stopped walking, stood in the middle of the field, his cattle grazing around him. Why do you want to know? I am curious. This is family business. We should discuss it as a family. Family, Frank almost laughed. They had not been a family in 2 years. Not since Grace died. Not since they abandoned him. Clay, I have to go. Cattle need feeding. Dad, wait, we should talk about this. There are tax implications, estate planning. You are 75, you need to think about the future, about your legacy, about what happens to all this when I die. I did not mean it like that. Yes, you did. Goodbye, Clay. Frank hung up. He turned off his phone, finished his work in peace. But the calls kept coming. Messages piled up. Clay called 3 times in one day. Diane called. Owen called for the first time in 6 months. All of them suddenly concerned, suddenly interested, suddenly wanting to reconnect. Frank listened to the voicemails, deleted them, did not call back. Then they came in person. Diane and her husband Jeff arrived on a Saturday morning, unannounced. Frank was working on a fence when he heard a car coming up the drive, an expensive SUV, Lexus, black, shiny. They got out. Diane was dressed like she was going to a country club, not a ranch. Jeff wore pressed jeans and a polo shirt. They looked around, taking in the improvements, the new barn, the solar panels, the fixed fences. Frank walked over, stood at a distance. He did not smile. Diane rushed forward, arms out. Dad, we have missed you so much. She hugged him. He stood there, arms at his sides. Let her hug him, did not return it. Why are you here? Diane stepped back, looked hurt. We wanted to see you, see the place. We felt terrible that we have not visited, but you just took off so suddenly. We were worried. Jeff walked around, looking at everything, calculating. Frank could see it in his eyes, assessing value, planning. This is quite a setup you have got here, Frank. Must have cost a fortune to renovate. Frank said nothing. They went inside. Frank made coffee he did not drink. They sat at his kitchen table. Diane kept touching his arm, smiling, acting like they had always been close. Dad, the place looks amazing. You have done so much. You must tell us everything about Uncle Earl, about the inheritance. We want to help. Help with what? Well, managing everything. Diane glanced at Jeff. Jeff is great with finances. He could look at your accounts, make sure everything is structured properly, and I could help with bookkeeping, organization. We are family, we should work together. Frank sipped his coffee, watched them. 2 people he had raised, fed, clothed, educated, who had not visited once in 2 years, who had not called on his birthday, who had not come to Grace's grave on the anniversary of her death. Now they sat in his kitchen, smiling, pretending, wanting something. I appreciate the offer, but I have professionals handling everything. Lawyers, accountants, it is taken care of. Jeff leaned forward. Frank, no offense, but you are a retired teacher. This is complicated stuff, estate law, tax law, oil and gas contracts. You need expert help. I have expert help. We are not just experts, Jeff said. We are family, we have your best interests at heart. Frank set down his coffee cup. Do you? The question hung in the air. Diane looked uncomfortable. Jeff's jaw tightened. Of course we do, Diane said. Dad, why would you even ask that? Because you have not been here, you have not called. You have not given a damn about me for 2 years, but now that you heard I have money, here you are, concerned, helpful, interested. Diane's eyes filled with tears. Dad, that is not fair. We have been busy. We have our own lives, our own families, but we have always loved you, always thought about you. Frank stood up. I need to get back to work. Dad, please. You should go. They did not leave immediately. They tried to argue, to explain, to convince, but Frank walked out, went back to his fence. They eventually got in their Lexus and drove away. Frank watched them go, felt nothing. Owen came 3 days later, midweek, alone. He drove an older sedan, nothing fancy. He got out, stood by his car, just looking at Frank. Frank was on the porch, coffee in hand. He did not say anything, just waited. Owen walked over slowly, stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked thinner, tired, older than his 39 years. "Can I sit?" Frank gestured to the empty chair. Owen sat. They stayed silent for a long time, just sitting, the way they used to when Owen was a kid, working on math problems together, comfortable in silence. Finally Owen spoke. His voice was quiet, rough. "Dad, I am sorry." Frank said nothing. "I am sorry I was not there. After Mom died. I am sorry I did not call on your birthday. I am sorry I did not come to the cemetery. I am sorry for all of it." Frank took a drink of coffee. "Okay." Owen looked at him. "That is it, just okay." "What do you want me to say?" "I do not know." Owen rubbed his face. "Clay and Diane sent me here. They wanted me to talk to you. About the money. About setting up some kind of family trust where we would all have a say in managing it. They think you are not capable of handling it yourself." "And what do you think?" Owen met his eyes. "I think it is your money. I think you can do whatever you want with it. I think my siblings are being greedy assholes, and I think I have been a coward." Frank studied his youngest son, saw genuine pain there, genuine regret. It was more than his other children had shown, but it was not enough. "Why are you here, Owen, really?" Owen looked away, out at the land, the cattle in the distance, "Because I need to tell you something, and because Clay is about to do something stupid, and you should know." "What?" "He is filing a lawsuit, him and Diane together, claiming that Mom's will specifies equal distribution of family assets, that Earl's estate should be considered marital property, subject to division among her heirs." Frank felt cold. She did not have a will like that. "I know, I have seen Mom's real will, everything to you, split among us after you die, but Clay found some document or made one up. I do not know. He hired a big firm in Denver. They think they can pressure you into settling, make this expensive and ugly until you give them something. Are you part of this lawsuit?" Owen shook his head. "No, I told them I wanted nothing to do with it. Clay tried to forge my signature on preliminary documents. I found out. I withdrew. Hired my own lawyer to officially oppose their claim." Frank sat back. Let this information settle. His children were going to sue him, take him to court, fight over money he had not even known existed 6 months ago. "There is something else," Owen continued. "I quit my job, the corporate firm. I am working at Montana Legal Aid now, helping people who cannot afford lawyers. The pay is terrible. Emily left me, said I changed too much, said she did not sign up for this. She took the kids. I see them every other weekend." Owen's voice cracked. "I screwed up everything, Dad. My marriage, my relationship with you, my whole life. I was making $300,000 a year defending companies that screw workers, coming home to a house I hated, being a person I hated, and I just kept doing it because I did not know how to stop." Frank listened, said nothing. "Then Mom died," Owen continued, "and I should have been there, I should have helped you, but I was scared, scared of seeing her like that, scared of facing what I had become, so I ran, I made excuses, I let you down." Owen wiped his eyes. "I know I cannot fix it, I know sorry is not enough, but I am trying to be different, be better. I am not asking for your money. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am just telling you, so you know." They sat in silence again. Frank finished his coffee, thought about his son, the boy who used to sit with him late at night, working through equations, asking questions about life. That boy was still in there, buried under years of bad choices, but still there. "Owen," Frank said finally, I appreciate you coming here, I appreciate the warning, but you are right. Sorry is not enough. You want to be different, prove it through actions, not words. Owen nodded, I understand. You can help with the foundation I am planning, legal work, pro bono. You earn your way back through what you do, not what you say. Owen looked up. You would let me do that? We will see. Small steps. No promises, no instant forgiveness, just work. Okay, Owen stood, thank you. He left. Frank watched him drive away. One son who might be redeemable, two who were lost. Those were the odds. The lawsuit papers arrived a week later, delivered by a process server. Clay Morrison and Diane Fletcher versus Franklin Morrison, seeking declaration of Earl Morrison's estate as community property subject to distribution among Grace Morrison's heirs. Frank read the papers, called Ben Whitmore. Ben was not surprised. This is weak legally. Ben said, but they will drag it out, make it expensive, hope you settle. I am not settling. Good, we will fight it, but Frank, you need to know something. During discovery, we can subpoena their financial records, see why they are so desperate. Sometimes that reveals interesting things. Do it. Ben's team went to work. The discovery process took 3 weeks. When the results came back, Ben called Frank, asked him to come to Billings. This was too important for the phone. Frank drove to Ben's office, sat down. Ben spread documents across the desk. Your son Clay is in serious trouble. His development company is $2.3 million in debt. He is facing bankruptcy by the end of the year. He has been trying to get capital, but no bank will lend to him. Frank had expected something like this, but the number was shocking. There is more. Ben pulled out another document 3 months ago, before you even filed to claim Earl's estate. Clay received a payment of $50,000 from a company called Granite Ridge Development. They are partners with Northern Plains Energy. They develop land around drilling operations. I do not understand. Frank, your son was paid to help pressure you into selling the land. He was working with them before you even knew the land was valuable. He has been planning this. Frank felt sick, his own son conspiring against him for money. What about Diane? Her husband's hardware stores are failing. $1.7 million in debt, closing locations. They tried to take out a loan using your ranch as collateral, forged your signature. The bank caught it, reported it to us. That is fraud, that is a crime. Frank sat in silence. His children were not just greedy, they were desperate, and desperate people did terrible things. Ben Frank said quietly, I want to end this, but not by giving them money. I want justice. Ben smiled. Then let me show you what we are going to do. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in Billings. Neutral ground. A conference room in a downtown office building. Gray carpet. Long table. Windows overlooking the city. Frank arrived with Ben Whitmore. They were early. Ben carried 2 briefcases full of documents, evidence, the truth in paper form. Clay and Diane arrived 20 minutes later with their lawyer, Marcus Webb from a big Denver firm. Expensive suit, practiced smile. The kind of lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour and made people feel like they were getting a bargain. The mediator was Judge Patricia Yates, retired from the bench but still sharp. She had seen everything in 40 years, knew when people were lying, knew when cases had merit, knew when families were tearing themselves apart over money. Everyone sat. Marcus opened with his prepared statement, professional, smooth. He had done this 1,000 times. Your Honor, my clients simply seek what is fair. Grace Morrison contributed to the foundation that made this inheritance possible. She supported her husband through decades of hard work. She deserves recognition in the distribution of assets acquired as a result of that partnership. Ben did not interrupt, just took notes. Let Marcus talk. Sometimes the best strategy was silence. The estate in question came to Mr. Frank Morrison 10 years after his wife's death. Marcus continued, but the groundwork for that inheritance was laid during the marriage. Earl Morrison left his property to Frank because of the family Frank and Grace built together. Therefore, the estate should be considered community property under Montana law. It was a weak argument. Ben had told Frank this, but it was designed to sound reasonable, to make Frank look selfish if he refused to share. Judge Yates turned to Frank. "Mr. Morrison, would you like to respond?" Frank looked at his children. Clay would not meet his eyes. Diane stared at the table. They had lawyers speaking for them now. They could hide behind legal language, behind procedure. "My wife contributed everything to our marriage," Frank said quietly. "She worked 2 jobs, she sacrificed. She gave our children every opportunity, and she left a will that was very clear, everything to me, to be split among our children after my death, not before." Marcus jumped in. "With respect, Mr. Morrison, we have reason to believe that will may not reflect your wife's true intentions." Ben opened his briefcase, pulled out a document, slid it across the table. "This is Grace Morrison's will, notarized, witnessed by 2 people who are still alive and willing to testify. It is unambiguous." Marcus looked at the will. His expression did not change, but Frank could see the calculation happening. The case was weaker than he had thought. Judge Yates read the will, then looked at Clay and Diane. "Is there any evidence that this will is fraudulent or was signed under duress?" "No, Your Honor," Marcus admitted, "but we believe." "Belief is not evidence," Judge Yates said. "She was not cruel, just direct. Mr. Morrison inherited from his brother after his wife died. The property was never marital property. This claim has no legal basis." Marcus tried another angle. "Your Honor, our concern is for Mr. Morrison's welfare. He is 76 years old, managing a complex estate alone, large sums of money, oil and gas contracts. He needs family support. We are simply trying to ensure he has help." Frank almost laughed. They were painting themselves as concerned children, worried about their elderly father. It would be touching if it were not so obviously false. Ben leaned forward. "Your Honor, may I present some financial information that is relevant to this discussion?" He pulled out more documents, placed them in front of Judge Yates, then in front of Marcus, Clay, Diane. "Clayton Morrison's development company is $2.3 million in debt," Ben said calmly, "facing bankruptcy within months. Diane Fletcher and her husband have $1.7 million in business debt. Their stores are failing. Both of my clients' children are in severe financial distress." "So what?" Marcus said. "Their financial situation does not invalidate their claim." Ben pulled out another document. "This is a bank record showing a $50,000 payment to Clayton Morrison from Granite Ridge Development Corporation. This payment was made 3 months before Frank Morrison even filed to claim his inheritance. Granite Ridge is a partner company with Northern Plains Energy, the same company that holds the mineral rights lease on Morrison land." The room went silent. Clay's face went pale. Diane looked confused. Ben continued. "Mr. Clayton Morrison was paid to help pressure his father into selling the land. He was conspiring with a development company to defraud his own father, before his father even knew the land had value." Marcus looked at Clay. His professional smile was gone. "Clay, is this true?" Clay stammered. It was just a consulting fee. They wanted advice on family dynamics, how to approach." "You were paid to betray your father," Ben said flatly, "and that is not all." He placed another document on the table. This is a loan application. Wells Fargo Bank, $400,000. The collateral listed is Morrison Ranch in Montana. The signature is Franklin Morrison's. Frank had never signed that document, had never even seen it until Ben showed it to him last week. Ben looked at Diane and Jeff. You tried to take out a loan using your father's property as collateral. You forged his signature. The bank caught it, reported it. That is fraud. That is a felony. Diane started crying. We were desperate. The business was failing. We needed. You needed money, Ben said, so you decided to steal from your father. Judge Yates held up her hand. Enough. This mediation is over, Mr. Webb. Your clients have no case. Worse than that, they have potentially committed crimes. I suggest you advise them to drop this lawsuit immediately. And Mr. Morrison, she looked at Frank, if you wish to pursue criminal charges, you would be within your rights. Frank looked at his children. Clay was sweating. Diane could not stop crying. They had wanted his money so badly they had broken the law, had conspired, had lied, and now they were caught. He should have felt victorious, should have felt vindicated, but he just felt tired. I am not pursuing criminal charges, Frank said. I just want them to leave me alone. Judge Yates nodded. I will file a report recommending dismissal of this lawsuit, and I will refer Mr. Clayton Morrison to the state bar for ethics investigation. Any lawyer who takes money to conspire against his own father needs to answer for that. The mediation ended. Marcus left quickly, embarrassed, his reputation damaged by clients who had lied to him. Clay and Diane sat frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. Frank stood, looked at them one last time. You could have just called, he said quietly. You could have visited. You could have been my children, but you chose this instead. I hope the money you did not get was worth losing your father. He walked out. Ben followed. They did not look back. But Clay and Diane were not done. The lawsuit was officially dropped 2 days later, but they were desperate, drowning in debt, and drowning people will grab onto anything. They showed up at the ranch 1 week after the mediation, together. No lawyer this time, just the two of them. Frank was feeding cattle when he heard the car. He did not stop working, just waited. They walked out to the valley, found him with the herd. Clay spoke first. His voice was different, not smooth, not confident, just desperate. Dad, please, we need help. We are going to lose everything. Frank kept spreading hay, did not look at them. Diane tried, crying again, always crying now. Dad, I know we screwed up, I know we hurt you, but we are your children, we need you. Frank finally turned, looked at them, really looked at them. These people he had raised, fed, clothed, loved, they were strangers now, had been for a long time. You are not my children, he said, not anymore. Children call their father, children visit, children care. You are just people who share my blood, that is all. Dad, please, Clay begged, if we declare bankruptcy, we lose our homes, our businesses, everything. Good, Frank said, maybe you will learn something. He walked past them, back to his truck, drove away, left them standing in the field. He did not feel guilty. He had tried, had given them chances, but some people could not be saved from themselves. The trial would have ended there, but something unexpected happened. The town of Riverside found out. Jake heard about the lawsuit through his own lawyer. He told Betty. Betty told Pastor Jim. Within days, everyone knew. The Morrison children had sued their father, had tried to steal his land, had lied, had cheated. The town was angry. Frank was one of them now. He had proved himself, worked hard, helped people, asked for nothing in return. He had earned their respect, and now outsiders were trying to take advantage of him. A town meeting was held at the church. Jake organized it. 200 people showed up, almost the entire population of Riverside. Jake spoke first, standing at the front, voice strong. Frank Morrison is a good man. He has been a good neighbor, a good friend. He came here with nothing and built something. Now his own kids are trying to take it from him. I say we do something about it. The crowd murmured agreement. Betty stood. We should set up a legal defense fund. Help Frank with the costs. Frank was not at the meeting. He did not know it was happening, but when Jake called him that night, told him the town had raised $15,000 to help with legal fees, Frank had to sit down. He could not speak. I do not need the money, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. We know, Jake said, but we wanted you to know. You are not alone, you are one of us. The legal defense fund became something else, a statement, a community standing with one of their own. Frank tried to return the money. The town refused, so he donated it to the church, for families in need. The circle of giving continued. When the actual trial date approached, the town made plans. They would drive to the courthouse, 2 hours away. They would fill the gallery. They would show the judge that Frank Morrison mattered, that he was not some isolated old man who could be taken advantage of. The trial began on a Monday morning, Montana District Court. Judge Helen Rodriguez presiding. She was 60, no nonsense, fair. She had reviewed the preliminary filings, knew this was a weak case, but it had to play out. Clay and Diane entered with Marcus Webb. They looked diminished, scared. This was not mediation anymore. This was public record. Their actions would be exposed for everyone to see. Frank entered with Ben. Behind them came 40 people from Riverside, filling 3 rows: Jake, Betty, Pastor Jim, Miguel and Carlos, the entire forgotten club, Harold, Dorothy, Robert and Susan, all of them. Judge Rodriguez noticed, looked at the gallery, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Marcus presented his case over 2 days. It was everything Ben had predicted: emotional appeals, manipulation of facts, trying to paint Frank as a confused old man who needed family protection. Clay testified first. He was nervous, stumbling over words, trying to portray himself as the concerned son. I just want what is best for my father, he said. He is elderly, isolated, making decisions without family input. We are worried. Ben cross-examined, pulled out phone records. Mr. Morrison, how many times did you call your father in the 18 months after your mother died? Clay hesitated. I am not sure. Let me help you. Ben read from the records. Your father called you 47 times. You answered 8 times. Average call duration, 3 minutes. Does that sound like a concerned son? Clay had no answer. When was the last time you visited your father before you heard about the inheritance? It had been a while. I was busy. 2 years, Ben said. You did not visit your father for 2 years after your mother died, but 3 weeks after you heard about money, you drove 200 miles. Why is that? Clay could not answer, just sat there, exposed. Diane testified next. More tears, more emotional manipulation. She talked about loving her father, about wanting to help, about family being important. Ben was gentler with her, but no less effective. Mrs. Fletcher, you and your husband attempted to take out a loan using your father's property as collateral. Is that correct? Diane looked at her lawyer. Marcus started to object, but there was no objection to make. It was a fact. We were desperate, Diane whispered. Desperate enough to forge your father's signature. It was not like that. Then what was it like? Diane broke down, could not continue. Judge Rodriguez called a recess. The defense case began on day 3. Ben called character witnesses first, people who knew Frank, who had seen what kind of man he was. Jake took the stand, testified about Frank helping at the hardware store, about the Marine brotherhood they shared, about Frank being there for people without being asked. Betty testified about Frank joining the Forgotten Club, about how he understood what it meant to be abandoned by family, about his quiet kindness. Pastor Jim testified about Frank's volunteer work, teaching carpentry to high school students, fixing things for elderly neighbors, never asking for payment. Miguel testified about working on the ranch, about Frank treating them with respect, paying fair wages, teaching Carlos skills that would help him for life. Each witness added to the picture. Frank Morrison was not a confused old man. He was competent, generous, kind, a man who had built a life and a community from nothing. Then Frank testified. He took the stand on day 4. The courtroom was silent, everyone leaning forward, waiting to hear what he would say. Ben asked questions, simple ones about his life, his marriage, his children, Grace's death, the loneliness after, the decision to move to Montana. Frank spoke quietly. No drama, no performance, just truth. After my wife died, I was alone. I called my children. They did not call back. I invited them for holidays. They did not come. I sat at her grave on the anniversary of her death. I waited. No one came. He paused, looked at Clay and Diane. They would not meet his eyes. I moved to Montana because I needed a place where my absence did not hurt, where I could exist without waiting for a phone that never rang. I found peace there, purpose, friends who cared about me for who I was, not what I had. Why did you not tell your children about the inheritance? Ben asked. Because they had not cared about me when I had nothing. I saw no reason to tell them when I had something. Do you believe your children love you? Frank thought about that, long silence. I believe they love the idea of having a father, the idea of family, but when it comes to actually being there, actually caring, no, I do not think they love me. I think they tolerate me, and now they want my money. The courtroom was completely still, not a sound, not a movement. Mr. Morrison, what do you want from this trial? I want to be left alone, Frank said. I want to live my life, help people who need help, and when I die, leave something that matters, not to people who abandoned me, but to people who understand what that feels like. Ben sat down. Marcus tried to cross-examine, tried to poke holes, but there were no holes, just a man telling his truth. On day 5, Ben called his surprise witness, James Thornton, Executive Vice President of Northern Plains Energy. He came under subpoena, did not want to be there. Ben established who he was, what his company did, then went for the kill. Mr. Thornton, does your company have any relationship with Granite Ridge Development Corporation? Yes, they handle land development around our drilling sites. Did Granite Ridge have any involvement with attempting to acquire Morrison Ranch land? Thornton shifted uncomfortably. They expressed interest. Did they pay anyone to help facilitate that acquisition? Silence. Thornton looked at his lawyer. The lawyer shook his head slightly, but Thornton was under oath. They paid Clayton Morrison $50,000 for consulting services. What kind of consulting? The lawyer stood. Objection, speculation. Judge Rodriguez looked at Thornton. I will allow it. Answer the question. They paid him to pressure his father into selling the land. Thornton said quietly. They thought family influence would work better than direct negotiation. The courtroom erupted, not loud, but a collective gasp, movement, shock. Judge Rodriguez banged her gavel. Mr. Thornton, Ben continued, did Northern Plains Energy have any knowledge of this arrangement? We knew Granite Ridge was working the family angle. We did not ask for details. So you knew Clayton Morrison was being paid to betray his father, and you allowed it. Thornton said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Ben sat down. Marcus tried damage control, tried to spin it, but there was no spin. Clay had sold out his father for $50,000. Everyone knew it now. It was in the record, forever. The trial concluded on day 6. Both sides gave closing arguments. Marcus tried, painted a picture of family reconciliation, of children trying to help their father, but it was hollow. Everyone had seen the truth. Ben spoke last. He did not yell, did not perform, just laid out facts. This case is simple. An elderly man inherited property from his brother. His children who had abandoned him suddenly showed interest. They tried to manipulate him. When that did not work, they tried to sue him. When that did not work, they tried to defraud him. This is not about family. This is about greed. He paused, looked at the jury, at the judge. Frank Morrison spent 50 years sacrificing for his children. He worked 3 jobs. He went without. He gave them every opportunity. And when he needed them most, after his wife died, they disappeared. Now they want to take from him again. I ask you, how much more does he owe them? How much more should any parent owe children who refuse to be children? He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Rodriguez did not need long to decide. She announced her ruling the next morning. I have reviewed all evidence, all testimony, and I find the plaintiff's case without merit. Grace Morrison's will is clear. Earl Morrison's estate came to Frank Morrison after her death. It is not community property. It is not subject to division. She looked at Clay and Diane. Her expression was stern. Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by the evidence of conspiracy and fraud. Mr. Clayton Morrison accepted money to pressure his father. Mrs. Diane Fletcher attempted to forge documents. These are serious matters. I am dismissing this case with prejudice. The plaintiffs are ordered to pay all of defendants' legal fees, and I am referring both Clayton Morrison and Jeffrey Fletcher to the district attorney for investigation of fraud charges. Clay and Diane looked stunned, destroyed. They had lost everything, their case, their money, their dignity, and now they faced potential criminal charges. Judge Rodriguez turned to Frank. Mr. Morrison, I am sorry you had to go through this. No parent should have to defend themselves against their own children. You are free to do with your property as you see fit. Frank nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. The trial was over. Frank walked out of the courtroom. The people from Riverside surrounded him, congratulating him, hugging him. Jake clapped him on the shoulder. Betty had tears in her eyes. Pastor Jim said a quiet prayer of thanks. Frank felt empty. He had won. But it did not feel like victory. It felt like the end of something. The final death of a family that had been dying for years. That night back at the ranch, Frank sat on his porch, looking at the stars, thinking about what to do next. He had $24 million, land, resources, time, but no family, no one to leave it to, no one who would carry on his name with any meaning. Unless he built something that mattered, something bigger than himself. He called Ben Whitmore the next morning. I want to set up a foundation. Ben was ready. He had been expecting this. What kind of foundation? For people like me, Frank said. Elderly people abandoned by their families, people who need help, who need community, who need to know they are not alone. They spent 2 weeks on the paperwork, creating the structure, defining the mission, securing the funding. Frank donated $18 million, kept $6 million for himself, more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of his life. The Morrison Legacy Foundation was born. Its mission was simple: support elderly Americans abandoned by their families, provide housing, legal aid, community, hope. The first Morrison house opened 6 months later, on the ranch property. Frank had converted the old bunkhouse and built additions, 12 private rooms, shared kitchen, common areas, library. It was not fancy, but it was dignified, warm, a place where people could live with respect. The residents moved in slowly, each one with their own story, each one abandoned, forgotten, each one finding family again. Harold moved in first, 78 years old. His son had stolen his retirement and disappeared. Harold had been living in his car. Now he had a room, meals, people who cared. Dorothy came next, 81, her daughters fighting over her house while she was still alive, stuck in a nursing home alone. Now she was free, had her own space, her own life. Robert and Susan, married 50 years. Their children had drained their savings with endless loans, never paid back, never visited. Now they were together, safe, surrounded by people who understood. 8 residents in that first house, 8 people who had been invisible. Now they were seen, valued, home. Frank gave the tour on opening day, showed them the rooms, the kitchen, the land, the cattle. This is not charity, he told them. This is family, real family, built on choice, not blood. That night, the first dinner together, 8 residents, Betty as house manager, Jake who had built the furniture, Pastor Jim who blessed the meal, Frank who sat quietly at the end of the table. Harold spoke, his voice shaking. I have not sat at a table with people who cared in 5 years. Thank you for seeing us. Frank could not speak, just nodded. This was legacy, this was meaning, this was what the money was for. Not for children who had abandoned him, but for people who understood what that abandonment meant, and who deserved better. 6 months after the trial, Morrison House had grown. What started as 12 rooms became 20, 2 buildings now, connected by a covered walkway, a garden where residents could grow vegetables, a workshop where they could build things, a library with comfortable chairs and afternoon sun. The foundation expanded beyond Riverside. A second house opened in Billings, a third in Great Falls, each one following the same model: dignity, community, respect, not charity, not pity, just a place where people who had been forgotten could remember what it felt like to matter. Frank was 76 now, still working the ranch, still feeding cattle every morning, still fixing things that broke, but he had help. Carlos worked full-time now, learning the operation, planning to take over someday. The foundation needed leadership. Frank could not run it forever. He was on the board, made big decisions, but he needed an executive director, someone who understood the mission, who had lived through abandonment and come out the other side. Owen called one afternoon in October, 6 months after the trial. His voice was different, steadier, more certain. "Dad, can I come see you?" Frank was mending fence, phone tucked against his shoulder, hands working wire. "Yes." Owen arrived the next day. He drove the same old sedan. Nothing had changed about his appearance, but something had changed inside. Frank could see it in how he walked, how he held himself. The shame was still there, but it was not crushing him anymore. They sat on the porch, the ritual they had established, silence first, then words when they were ready. "I have been working at legal aid for 8 months now," Owen said. $45,000 a year. I rent a studio apartment. I see my kids every other weekend. Emily is remarrying, someone with money and stability, someone who is not trying to figure out who he is at 40 years old. He paused, looked at the land, the cattle grazing in the distance. "But I am happy, for the first time in my adult life. I am actually happy. I help people who cannot afford lawyers, people getting screwed by landlords, by employers, by family members. Yesterday I helped a woman whose son stole her Social Security checks. Got them back. Got him arrested. Frank listened, said nothing, let Owen talk. I am not asking to come back into your life as your son. Owen continued. I do not deserve that, but the foundation, what you are building, I want to be part of it, not for money, not for redemption, just because it matters, and I understand it in a way most people cannot. Why? Frank asked. Why do you understand it? Owen was quiet for a long time, then he spoke, his voice low, raw. Dad, I need to tell you something about Uncle Earl. Something Mom made me promise never to tell, but she is gone now, and you deserve to know. Frank waited. Uncle Earl was not just your brother, he was my godfather when I was 12. You and Mom sent me to the ranch every summer, 2 months, remember? Frank remembered. Owen had loved those summers, came back different, calmer, more grounded. Uncle Earl taught me things, Owen said, about land, about animals, about work, but more than that. He taught me about what matters. He said money was a tool, not a goal. He said family was about showing up, not about blood. He said if you do something, you do it right, or you do not do it at all. Owen's voice cracked. He taught me to be a real man, not the kind who measures success in dollars or titles, the kind who measures it in whether you can look yourself in the mirror. He wiped his eyes when he died. I was 29, making $100,000 a year at the firm, thought I had it all figured out. Mom pulled me aside at the funeral. She said Uncle Earl told her something before he died, that he was leaving everything to you, and that when the time came, I would need to remember what he taught me, that I would need to stand up for what was right, even if it was hard. Frank felt something tight in his chest. He had not known any of this. I forgot, Owen said. I forgot everything he taught me. I chose money over meaning, status over substance. I became exactly what he warned me not to be, and when you needed me most, after Mom died, I was not there because I was ashamed, because seeing you reminded me of what I had become. He looked at Frank, really looked at him. That is why I quit the firm. That is why I am trying to change. Not for you, for him, for Uncle Earl, and for the kid I used to be, the one he believed in. Frank sat with this, all of it, the summers he had forgotten about, the lessons Earl had taught, the promise his son had broken and was now trying to keep. Owen, Frank said finally, you want to work for the foundation? Yes. Not as my son, as an employee. Yes. You will work harder than anyone else. You will earn half what you could make elsewhere, and I will hold you to a higher standard because of who you are. Owen nodded, I understand. Frank stood, held out his hand. Then you are hired, executive director of the Morrison Legacy Foundation. Salary $60,000, start Monday. Owen shook his hand, then pulled his father into a hug. Frank stiffened, then slowly, carefully, he hugged back. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Owen moved to Riverside 2 weeks later, rented a small house near the church, set up an office in town, threw himself into the work with intensity that surprised even Frank. He visited every Morrison house, interviewed every resident, learned their stories, their needs, their dreams. He set up support systems, legal aid clinics, social activities, medical coordination. He worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Frank watched, did not interfere, just watched. After 3 months, he called Owen into his office. You are going to burn out. Owen looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, thinner than he should be. I am fine. You are not. You are trying to save everyone to make up for not saving me. It does not work that way. Owen sat down, put his head in his hands. I do not know how else to do this. One person at a time, Frank said. One day at a time. The foundation will be here long after we are both gone. Pace yourself." Owen nodded, started taking Sundays off, started eating regular meals, started sleeping more than 4 hours a night. The work continued, but sustainable now, intentional. Months became a year became 2. The foundation grew, 6 houses, then 8, legal aid programs in 12 cities, a hotline that received hundreds of calls each month, people who were alone finding out they were not alone anymore. Owen proved himself, not through words, through actions, through showing up, through doing the work even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Frank saw this, acknowledged it. One evening on the porch, their usual spot, he said something he had not said in years. "You did good work this week." Owen looked surprised. "Thank you. Earl would be proud of what you are building." Owen's eyes filled. That means everything. They sat in silence, father and son, not what they used to be, but something new, something earned. Clay never contacted Frank again. His development company went bankrupt. His wife left him. He moved to Arizona, started over in construction, working for someone else, making hourly wages. Frank heard about it through lawyers, felt nothing. Diane tried once. A letter, 2 years after the trial, apologizing, explaining, asking for another chance. Frank read it, put it in a drawer, never responded. Some bridges once burned could not be rebuilt. That was okay. But Owen was different. Owen was doing the work, and slowly, carefully, Frank let him back in, not as the son he used to know, as the man he was becoming. 3 years after the trial, the foundation was invited to testify before Congress. Elder care reform, protection for seniors. Frank was asked to speak. He brought Owen with him. They sat in a hearing room in Washington. Senators and representatives, cameras, reporters, Frank in his only suit, Owen beside him taking notes. Frank told his story, not for sympathy, for policy. He spoke about the epidemic of elder abandonment, about children who saw parents as burdens, about the need for legal protections, about the importance of community. His testimony was quiet, direct, no theatrics, just truth. When he finished, the room was silent. Then one senator started clapping, then another, then the whole room. Standing ovation for an old rancher from Montana who had turned personal pain into national purpose. The Morrison Act passed 6 months later. Federal funding for elder advocacy programs, legal aid for seniors, community support systems, named after Frank Morrison, his legacy now part of law. Frank was 80 when his heart started failing. The doctor in Billings was direct. Congestive heart failure. You have maybe 2 years with treatment, maybe 6 months without. Frank asked the question everyone asks but few really want answered. How long if I just keep living my life? No hospitals, no interventions, just medicine for symptoms. Maybe a year, the doctor said, maybe less, quality over quantity. Frank chose quality, he told Owen. Owen wanted to argue, wanted to push for aggressive treatment, but he stopped himself. Remembered what Uncle Earl had taught him. A man makes his own choices. You respect that. "Okay, Dad," Owen said quietly, "I will be here, whatever you need." Frank's last year was good. He still fed cattle most mornings. Though Carlos did the heavy work now, he still sat on his porch every evening, watching the sun set over land he had rebuilt from ruin. He still played checkers with Harold at Morrison House, still attended the forgotten club dinners. He was not afraid. He had done what he came to do, built something that mattered, helped people who needed help, found peace after years of pain. Owen moved into the ranch house. Frank protested weakly. Owen insisted, "I am not leaving you alone, not this time." They lived together, father and son, cooking meals, watching television, talking about the foundation. Sometimes talking about nothing, just being present. It was a gift. Time they both knew was limited, time they did not waste. One evening in January, Frank was unusually tired. He had not been out to the cattle, had barely eaten. Owen suggested calling the doctor. Frank refused. "I am just old and tired, that is all." They sat on the couch together, watching a football game neither cared about. Frank fell asleep during the third quarter. Owen covered him with a blanket, let him rest. Frank woke around midnight. Owen was asleep in the chair across the room. Frank looked at his son, really looked at him. This man who had been lost and found his way back, who had done the hard work of becoming someone worth being. Frank got up slowly, quietly, wrote a note, left it on the kitchen table, then went to his bedroom, lay down fully clothed, looked at Grace's picture on the nightstand. "Coming home, Gracie, be there soon." He closed his eyes. His heart beat slower, slower, then stopped. Owen found him in the morning, peaceful, no pain, just gone. He read the note Frank had left. "Owen, thank you for coming back. You did not fix everything, but you fixed enough. I am proud of the man you became. Keep the foundation going. Keep helping the forgotten. Tell Clay and Diane I forgave them. Not for them, for me. Tell your kids their grandfather loved them even from distance. And tell yourself, you earned your way back, Dad." Owen sat on the floor, held the note, and cried. The funeral was planned for Saturday. Owen called Clay and Diane, left messages. Clay called back, said he would come. Diane did not respond. Riverside Community Church could not hold everyone who came. 600 people, the entire town, every resident of every Morrison house, veterans from across the state, legal aid clients Owen had helped, strangers whose lives had been touched by the foundation. They filled the church, filled the overflow room, stood outside in the cold January air, all of them there to say goodbye to a man who had seen them, who had made them matter. Jake helped organize the service, Marines in dress blues, an honor guard for a brother who had served, the flag folded with precision, presented to Owen as next of kin. Clay sat in the back, alone. He looked older, worn down by failure. He did not speak to anyone, left immediately after. Diane did not come, sent flowers, a generic card. Owen threw them away. Owen gave the eulogy, standing at the front, looking at the crowd, at the faces of people his father had helped. He spoke without notes, from memory, from heart. "My father was a teacher, but his greatest lesson was not math. It was this: your value is not determined by who remembers you, but by how you choose to live when you are forgotten." He paused, composed himself. Dad was forgotten by his family. He could have been bitter. Instead, he built a new family, one based on choice, not blood. He taught me that redemption is not about erasing the past. It is about building a better future one day at a time. He looked at the residents of Morrison House in the front rows. Harold, Dorothy, Robert and Susan, all of them. "I am here because he gave me that chance. The foundation will continue because hundreds of forgotten people deserve that chance too. Dad did not just leave us money or buildings. He left us a way to be, a way to see people, a way to matter." When the service ended, they carried the casket outside, buried Frank in the small cemetery in Riverside, near the bench where he used to talk to Grace. Betty made sure there were flowers year-round. Jake built a bench next to the grave. People came, sat, remembered. The Morrison Legacy Foundation grew 10 years after Frank died. It was one of the largest elder advocacy organizations in the country. 23 Morrison houses across 12 states, serving 10,000 seniors. Annual budget $8 million, sustainable from the original endowment, growing every year. The Morrison Act had been expanded. Federal programs in all 50 states, legal protections for seniors, community support systems, billions of dollars invested in helping the forgotten. Owen Morrison ran the foundation until he was 67, then retired, passed leadership to his daughter, Sarah, who had grown up watching her father work, who understood the mission in her bones. The ranch was protected forever. Conservation easement could never be developed, never be sold. Morrison House was designated a historical site. 5,000 visitors every year, learning the story, taking it home with them. At the entrance was a bronze statue, Frank Morrison standing with one hand on a fence post, looking out over his land. The plaque beneath read, Frank Morrison, 1949 to 2030, teacher, veteran, rancher, visionary. He taught us that it is never too late to begin again, that true legacy is measured in lives touched, not possessions accumulated, that dignity and respect are rights for all regardless of age. He found a forgotten ranch with abandoned cattle. He built a movement that changed a nation. Owen visited the statue often, even at 67, even after retiring. He would sit on the bench, look at his father frozen in bronze, talk to him the way Frank used to talk to Grace. You would not believe what we built, Dad. 23 houses, 10,000 people helped, national legislation, all because you refused to give up, all because you turned pain into purpose. One spring afternoon, Owen was sitting there. His grandson approached, 8 years old, curious, looking at the statue. "Grandpa, who is that man?" Owen smiled. "That is your great-grandfather, Frank Morrison. He was the strongest man I ever knew." Why was he strong? Owen thought about how to explain, not because he never fell. He fell hard, lost his wife, lost his children, lost everything, but he did not give up. At 74 years old, he started over, came here with nothing, built all of this. The boy looked at the statue, then at the Morrison house behind them, residents sitting on the porch, talking, laughing, living. Why did he do it? Because he knew what it felt like to be invisible, and he never wanted anyone else to feel that way. They sat together, 3 generations, the boy learning about a man he never met, a man whose choices decades ago had created the foundation for the boy's life. The boy did not understand yet, would not for years, but someday he would. Someday he would know that the best legacy is not money, it is meaning. Inside Morrison House, the current residents were preparing dinner. Harold had died 5 years ago, but new people had taken his place. Dorothy was still there, 96 now, sharp as ever, still telling stories about the early days, when Frank himself had given the tour. In the dining room, above the fireplace, hung a photograph, Frank on the porch of the ranch house. 70-something, gray hair, weathered face, but smiling, really smiling, not the polite smile of someone pretending, the real smile of someone who had found what they were looking for. Beneath the photo, a quote from Frank from his testimony to Congress, handwritten, framed. "I was abandoned by my family. I could have died bitter and alone. Instead, I found new family. Not through blood, through choice, through showing up, through caring. That is what we all deserve, at every age, for all our days, to be seen, to be valued, to matter." The sun set over Montana, orange light stretching across the land Frank had rebuilt, the cattle he had saved grazing in the valley, the houses he had built full of people who had been lost and were found. Somewhere in Arizona, Clay Morrison lived in a small apartment, worked construction, sent child support to an ex-wife, lived quietly, never contacted the foundation, never reached out to Owen, carried his regret alone. Some people never find their way back. That was his choice. Frank had made peace with it. Owen had too. Somewhere in Oregon, Diane lived with her second husband, worked as a bookkeeper for a small firm. Her children from her first marriage did not speak to her, history repeating. She thought about her father sometimes, about what she had lost, but never acted on it, pride or shame or some combination. She stayed away. That was her choice too. But Owen had chosen differently, had done the work, had earned his way back, and now he sat on a bench in Riverside, Montana, teaching his grandson about a man who had refused to be broken, who had turned loneliness into legacy, who had shown that it was never too late to become who you were supposed to be. The boy looked up at his grandfather, his young face serious, thinking hard about something. "Grandpa, when you get old, will you live here at Morrison House?" Owen smiled, thought about the question. "Maybe, if I need to, but I hope I am like your great-grandfather. I hope I keep working, keep helping, keep being useful until the very end." Did he die alone? No, Owen said quietly. "I was with him, holding his hand. The way he held your great-grandmother's hand when she died. He was not alone, not at the end." "That is good," the boy said with the simple wisdom of children. "Nobody should die alone." "Nobody should," Owen agreed. "That is why we built all this, so nobody has to." They sat together as the light faded, the statue of Frank Morrison standing eternal watch over the land he had saved, the foundation he had built, the lives he had changed. Frank Morrison had arrived in Montana at 74, broken, abandoned, with nothing but an old truck and a sleeping bag. He had found a ranch in ruins and cattle that had survived against impossible odds. He saw himself in those cattle, forgotten but alive, struggling but surviving, and he made a choice: to rebuild, to matter, to turn his pain into something that helped others. 20 years later, long after his death, the work continued. The houses grew, the people were helped, the legacy expanded, not because Frank Morrison was rich, not because he was famous, but because he had lived proof that one person choosing meaning over bitterness could change thousands of lives. The boy stood up, ready to go inside, ready for dinner with the family. Owen stood too, put his hand on the boy's shoulder. They walked toward the house together. Behind them, the statue stood silent in the gathering dark, Frank Morrison looking out over his land, over his legacy, over the proof that the last chapter of a life could be its greatest, that it was never too late, that showing up mattered more than blood, that family was built not born. And somewhere, somehow, Frank was still there, in every resident who found home, in every person who learned they were not alone, in every choice to see the forgotten and make them visible. The light faded, the stars came out, the ranch settled into night. Tomorrow would come, the work would continue, the legacy would grow. Because Frank Morrison had refused to give up, had refused to be nothing, had chosen instead to be everything to people who had nothing. That was the last harvest, not of crops or cattle, but of meaning, purpose, love, the things that actually matter when everything else is stripped away. And it was enough, more than enough, it was everything.